Hello, everyone, again, and thank you so much for joining us today for Strategizing Your Funding Search. I'm Calvin Landrum, a VISTA Training Coordinator with the Corporation for National and Community Service here in Washington, D.C., and I will be the host for today's webinar. I'll also be facilitating the live Q&A at the end of the session, and you may hear my voice a couple more times throughout this presentation. Also joining us are Bethany Dusablon and Joanne Lau from our partners at Education Northwest. They've helped us prepare today's webinar and will be managing the WebEx technology. So you'll probably see them pop up in the chat if you're having any issues. You can ask them questions and they'll help you out. So today we'll be focusing on the following session goals. And by the end of this session, you should be able to develop a search strategy to find the best potential funders for your project, organize information that will inform your organization's decisions about approaching funders, and be able to identify opportunities for in-kind support. Now we have two wonderful presenters for this session, and a little later on, we're going to hear from Shelby Lemons. Shelby is a current AmeriCorps VISTA member, serving as the National Development Coordinator at Reading Partners in Oakland. We're very glad that you're able to join us, Shelby. And but before we get to Shelby, we have our main speaker today. Our main speaker is Mo Hyman, and she's the founder and executive director of College Access Plan in Pasadena, California. She's an experienced fundraiser who also serves as a facilitator for the VISTA online courses in resource development and volunteer mobilization, so she's very familiar. Mo's also served as a VISTA supervisor at CAP for a number of very talented VISTA members who exceeded expectations and successfully completed a VISTA project. So hello, Mo. Nice to meet you.
Hi. Hi, everybody. It's good to be here. And if we're ready, let's get going.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So during this webinar, we'll cover each of these key areas that most VISTAs are likely to focus on in this portion of the grants process. So while actually writing a proposal may end up being something that you do, and it looks like from the chat a lot of you do that, there are other VISTA campus resources that we can steer you to so that you can do that phase of your work. But the steps we're going to walk through here are the research process of identifying prospects and information about them that you'll need, organizing what you find, and then weighing your options to figure out which ones seem promising and which ones are not as promising. You can expect to have your executive director or development director involved during all of these phases, but ultimately you'll be preparing them to move forward. Your goal is to prepare them to move forward after you've done research, or to prepare yourself if you are indeed going to be writing that grant. So last thing is that this lovely picture is of my VISTAs from a few years ago. So they're awesome, and the one on the left, Joanne, is now our managing director of our organization. So go VISTAs. All right. Moving on, the first thing that we're going to talk about is research that is available, funding opportunities that you can research that might be able to support your project's needs. And Sarah on the left in this picture, also a former VISTA and now our program director. So you can see we keep our VISTAs around. Before we start talking about research and the wide world of foundations, you want to know what support your organization already has in place or what it has received in the last few years. So be sure that you know where you stand with funders. You don't want to duplicate work or chase dead ends. Anything that you know your executive director or development director might already know isn't a good direction to go. You also want to be very mindful of grant cycles and your organization's eligibility if they aren't able to. Usually there's a year between your ability to apply. So you want to really be in contact with whoever your fundraising team is and make sure that you have information before you go hunting after, start researching foundations that you're not even eligible for. You may want to also talk to your organizational leadership about any funders that they might want to return to. Maybe they took a couple of years away, or maybe you have a new executive director or new leadership, and that usually means developing a new relationship. Be sure that you know what you want to fund before you start researching. You want to make sure what project you're looking for, if you're looking for general funds for the organization, if you're starting a capital campaign. We'll talk a little bit more about these types of funding in a second, but you just want to know what you're looking for. And then you just want to make sure that you understand the parameters of the type of funding you're seeking so that you know what the restrictions might be around how it is used. And on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit more about these types of funding that you'll be looking for. So the Foundation Center, which we're going to be looking at really closely in a minute, has a list on their help page that provides the terminology that they use for different types of funding. What you'll see here, for example, is the term general support. But a lot of organizations or a lot of foundations, when you go to their websites, it might say general operating fund, it might say core support, and these are usually terms that are used somewhat interchangeably, but on the Foundation Center website, it says general support. That might not be what you see on Foundation website. So what we want to know about general operating is that it's awesome because it usually can be used for pretty much anything. And it's also called unrestricted funds. Capital funds, they are funds that are for buildings, sure, like building a new building, but also for technology or vehicles like a van for a youth-serving organization or maybe a Meals on Wheels type organization. It can be a new AC unit for your building. So capital campaigns we often think of as developing these big buildings, but that's not what it has to be. Program development, obviously specific to programmatic funding. Program evaluation, a lot of foundations are now getting grants specifically geared towards results-based accountability for your organization and hiring an evaluator or something like that through a grant. Obviously, program-related investments or loans are circumstances where funders expect to get some return on their investment, usually in the form of a low-interest loan or some sort of capital like return on a fee-for-service program down the road. And then finally, in-kind donations of goods. And we're going to talk way at the end really briefly about how some of that works. But typically, in-kind donations will often come from corporate funders, like think about free computers from Dell or something like that. All right, so moving on, we have a poll question. So Joanne is going to open the poll for you all, and on the right side of your screen, you'll see a poll asking, how familiar are you with the current and recent funders of your sponsoring organization? Is it A, you're not at all familiar, B, you're a little familiar, or C, you're really, really familiar? Select the answer that you think best fits by clicking, and then make sure that you click the submit button so that we get your answer. And if you join the webinar on a mobile device, the polling feature is unfortunately unavailable, just so you know. So you get to share everybody else's responses.
I'm excited to see what they say. We've got, I think our system's calculating a little bit. Curious to know what we got going on here. Look at that. It looks like people are a little bit familiar.
Okay, so I think that's probably pretty normal for VISTA, right? You are, especially if you're earlier in your service, you might just be learning about what's happening, but if you've been around a little while, you're getting a lay of the land. It sometimes can be really hard to get all the historical information, right? Like, you want to know, hey, have we ever gone to this funder? And there might not be anybody around that realizes that 7 years ago you did. So sometimes it takes a little bit of research.
Definitely, definitely. And I think we're at the point in our year where I would say most of our VISTAs are probably kind of in the beginning phases of their project and just kind of learning the lay of the land. So yeah, I think this is probably pretty accurate.
Cool. Well, good to know. Some of you, it looks like you have a little bit of research to do. I strongly suggest you sit down and we're going to talk about this. One of the things I will reiterate over this entire webinar, so I might as well say it now, is that you really should be in conversation. Some of you maybe have a development director. Some of you in smaller organizations like mine may just be able to sit down and talk with the executive director about development, but really you want to get a sense of that historical information and find out where it all is. And it's not always readily available. That's just how organizations work. So it takes time. Be patient. You will get there. All right. Looks like we're ready to move on to the key mission area and key search term. We're going to, like I said, delve into the Foundation Center in a few minutes, but there are all kinds of search tools, obviously, right? You don't just search on you don't just search on the Foundation Center, you search online and other places. And one thing you should know is your mission area, health and human services, youth and learning, and what the key terms are associated with those. So you have to be really patient with research. It takes a lot of time, and if one keyword doesn't work, don't give up. Try to think about the other keywords that might be useful. You also want to avoid overly specific keywords, like the name of if you're in a very, very small town, or the specific name of your project. You want to be a little bit broader than that, and play around and see what works. If you get too few returns, try to broaden your search terms. If you get thousands and thousands, you might want to try something a little bit narrower. And that's going to take us to searching, and we're going to talk about Foundation Center. We'll touch in depth. We will touch briefly on Guidestar. We'll look a little bit at how you can cultivate information from other organizations' websites. And finally, just a couple of places to look for government grants, but the focus today will largely be on private funding. All right, we're getting into the Foundation Center. We're going to start with one of the most common resources. It's a key tool, a database with so many grantors and key details about each. There can be a learning curve for searching, and that's why we're going to pause here for a second and take a look around. And here we go. We're going to do this live tour. First, we're going to find out whether or not you have local access to the Foundation Center, because a subscription is fairly expensive, and for smaller organizations can be kind of prohibitive. So Bethany is going to be my hands clicking around while I talk. Thank you, Bethany. When you go here, exactly where Bethany has brought us right now, you'll see under Find Us, there's that map, and you can just click on the map, or you can click on Find Us. This will open, and when it does so, you can just put in your zip code on the page, and we're getting a little spinning guide, but there is a little spot here, there it is, to enter zip code, and that's a really easy way to search for something that's near you, or city or state. It really depends on how densely populated your area is. So that's how you find out if there's free Foundation Center access near you. Oftentimes it will be in a library or a community organization, and if you can't use Foundation, if you don't have access, then sometimes you have to find another alternative, and that can be either paying for Foundation access, directory access, or finding another organization that pays that will allow you to use theirs. All right, looks like we're logged in, and we're going to click on Search Grant Makers. We're going to go through looking for funding here. When we get here, there's the fields of interest, and if you look at these little blue, if you guys can see them on your screen, these little blue things that open tabs, these little links, and off to the side, we're just going to search for search terms that we think are good for us. So we're going to select adolescents. I'm trying to use things that are at the beginning of the alphabet here. So we're going to do adolescents, children and youth is going to be our next one once we find our adolescents. And now we're in our C's. And then we're going to finally use college preparation, which is what my organization does, so it's easy for me. So children and youth and college preparation. And when we get back to our geographic focus, we're going to choose California because it's a large state, and you really need to narrow your focus. As you can imagine, searching the entire state of California probably brings you back way too many returns. Then we're going to click on the little blue More Location options just so you can see what's there. Under the Grant Maker location, so we can add California as the state, and we're going to add Los Angeles as our county, because, like I said, California is huge, and as you can imagine, and I'm sure a couple of you on the line are in San Francisco Bay Area like Shelby is, you can imagine there's a lot of funders in both San Francisco and Los Angeles and San Diego, so you really do need to narrow it down. And in a smaller rural community, you may need to keep it broad, so the search criteria might be your entire state, or it might just be a region, so you really have to think about where you are. So now we're going to go all the way down to our keyword search at the bottom of the page. And remember, just a few moments ago, we talked about keywords. And I'm going to put in general support here since I want to find core support or unrestricted funding. And like I said a few slides ago, general support is the term that the Foundation Center uses to do this. And so I think, are we ready to search? By the way, you might have noticed the exclude grant makers not accepting applications option. I think it's probably a lot of people might want to uncheck that, but I leave it because I just want to know the name of, even if a foundation is not openly accepting proposals, I want to know who's in my community, and that's why I do the broader search. So, okay, so we have 118. It looks like, which is a little different than our last search, so we're going to see if our foundation comes here. And I'm going to X out any foundations that give less than $50,000 because that, you'll see on the side that some foundations, it just says 0 giving, and obviously that's just too small. I feel like for some reason we have too few responses, but I'm going to plug in and see if this works. So now we're going to click on grant maker name at the top of the page, and I just want to point out to you that at the top of the page you can reorganize your responses any way you want. So if we click on grant maker name, what you're going to see is alphabetical. We're going to take a look a little bit closer at the Annenberg Foundation, which is one of the largest foundations in Southern California, and they give to a pretty wide array of types of organizations. So we're going to take a moment, take a look at what the Annenberg Foundation page looks like. They have a lot of information on their page. Some grant makers, you might just see a few lines of information, but I wanted to go through one with a little bit more. This is a large grant maker. Like I said, you want to make sure that they really do make grants wherever you land in your geographic region, so double check their priority areas. So we know that their region is indeed Los Angeles. And you also want to make sure that, that you're not limited in any way. We want to check out their purpose and their activities and the program areas. The Annenberg Foundation, you'll notice in their program areas that they have a couple of things. I mean, they're, I think it's the project just above program areas. You'll notice they have specific things listed, the names of specific things that they do. And it is a little bit easier to look under program areas and just see under the subjects or population groups. So I'm looking, I see education. Education is definitely college preparation. And then I see under population groups, I see children and youth. And so to me, that's enough information. And we also know that they are accepting applications. So from my experience, that's enough information to go, okay, I'm going to check out their website and see what else they have to offer. They seem to be pretty broad. They're interested in funding a lot of things. So I'm going to scroll all the way back up to the top of the page. And here I'm going to click on their website. And I open up their website, excuse me. And here we're going to go, I'm going to teach you a little bit. We're going to go to what we do and grant making. You can go to how to apply, which a lot of foundations you'll find a page that says how do I apply or giving grants or something like that. And here is where we can just kind of scroll around and look at the information all about what their criteria are, whether or not they fund large or small organizations, what they fund, what they do not fund, what kinds of things they don't fund, and most importantly, the application process, which in this case is an online process, but they also have a bunch of things that you have to download and templates. And way, way later in our conversation here, we will actually pause and organize those templates so you can see some of the ways. So right here at step 3, we could just download our required templates, which will include a budget template and things like that. And we'll look a little bit later at where those documents go when you download them. Thank you so much, Bethany, for leading us through that live demo. That was great. Hopefully you guys got a sense. I know it was kind of quick, but hopefully you got a sense of one of the key tools that you can use. But you won't always have access to the Foundation Center. And like I said, a subscription can be prohibitive for smaller organizations. So we're going to take a look at some of the hacks what are some of the ways that you can get around using the Foundation Center if you don't have access to it? So let's take a real quick look at Guidestar. I love Guidestar. Collects information on all nonprofits, including foundations. I'm assuming some of you have used it before. You can download 990s or Form 990s, which are organization tax forms. You can see the size of the budget of a foundation or another organization. You can see the number of staff members that they have. And there's so many other things that you can do here, but free access is not free. Free access is granted to organizations that have an active account and that update their organization profile. They sort of work on the model that if your organization profile is up to date so funders and donors can learn more about you, you can learn more about funders. And so it really is a give and take kind of community. But one of the great things is then they give you a badge, and it's bronze, silver, gold, platinum for filling out for the completeness of your profile. And especially for smaller organizations or organizations that are really trying to build a core of funders, you can take that badge and put your Guidestar badge on your website, and that can help when an organization, when a foundation comes to your website and wants to see who you are, can really, really help them to know what your Guidestar ranking is. Also, a lot of foundations are expecting that you have at least your 990 uploaded to Guidestar. Annenberg Foundation is one of those. When you apply to a grant with the Annenberg Foundation, you don't print out all zillion pages of your 990 and mail it to them. You just have an up-to-date Guidestar account, and they go ahead to Guidestar and download it. It's a great thing to demonstrate legitimacy to funders. So moving on from Guidestar, we're going to cruise over to other organizations' websites and how you might use them to identify potential funders for you. Most websites, I'm sure your own organization might have this, can have our donors page, or we call our investors page, and they will usually list pretty close to the top of the page who their funders are because they want to show off who's giving them money. And if you go to organizations pages, they might have a similar mission, area of expertise, similar stakeholder groups to your organization, perhaps similar budget size or in your local area, similar kinds of projects. Or my favorite thing to do is find people in your geographic area that serves the same population a little bit differently. So we're going to look at an example in a few minutes of how, in a few seconds, of how that works. And when you go here, you can see who funds them, so that's great. Moving on to a little bit more on other organizations. We see our duck here going for a deeper dive. That was the idea, and also ducks are awesome. You may personally end up doing this part of the research if you've built a relationship with these organizations that you're deeper diving into, but be considerate. Your job is not to poach funders. Some organizations are really sensitive about their questions, so it might be a good idea to follow up with, once you go looking around on their website, you might want to reach out and have a phone call if you know the organization well, and it's a good idea that the person who knows them best at your organization is the one making that call and determining whether or not it's a good idea. Be careful about, while you're doing foundation research, let's say I pluck a foundation, like I have the Angel Foundation on my website, was the top one I think that you saw. You want to be really, really sensitive to just reaching out and saying, oh, I want to know more about this foundation, and reaching out, and particularly reaching out to foundation board members, which is often seen as something you should not do. Before you go down this road, make sure that you continue down this research. We're going to keep doing research. So I just wanted to make sure that's clear to you. It's not time to start just reaching out and saying, ooh, what's going on here? We want to be really, really thoughtful about both funders and the organizations that we partner with. And I'm going to give you an example about partner organizations from my own experience. In my community, we have a collaborative of 5 organizations, including mine, that run a summer program for middle school students together. An organization called Day One does work with positive mental and physical health, while we do work with college access and success. While our missions are different, we serve the same students in our community, the same schools, the same age groups. And so we might qualify for funding from foundations that both focus on youth. However, our mission, we're college access and success, their health and wellness. focus on different things. So it's most likely that we won't be direct competitors in a funding pool unless the funder is really, really small. And usually what actually happens is that they see that you're partnering with, a funder might see that you're partnering with an organization that they already like and they already invest in, and they're even more likely to invest in you. And your partners know that. So you won't be direct competitors. So what I might do is I already have a relationship with this executive director. Beyond going to the Day One website and finding out who funds them, I might reach out and say, hey, Christy, that is actually her name, what's going on at Day One? Who are your current funders, and who do you think would be a good fit for CAP? And these are the kinds of things that are really important to community relationships and building trust amongst partners. So the best people to talk to about grant opportunities are the people you already know. And I just want to make that really clear. If you don't have Foundation Center access, there are other ways to go. You just need to use your relationship sometimes. All right. So we're going to now pause really briefly on government grants. GrantWatch and grants.gov are a couple of resources that you can use for this. GrantWatch collects requests for proposals focused on local, state, and federal grants. You can get the gist of government grants here without paying for the fee for a subscription. So what I usually do is look up and see whether there's anything that pops up in my area, and then I just look on the government website for those grants instead of paying for the fee for GrantWatch. I'm a really good researcher, so I'm not usually into paying for things when I can find it on my own, but it depends on your organization and whether you already have a login for these things. And as you can tell, we're not going to really talk about government grants very much, but I very much encourage you to go check out these websites if you are interested in getting government funding. There are a couple of good tools that you can find. All right, it is about time to hand the mic over to Shelby.
Wonderful. So let's get some firsthand experience from a VISTA member who's been doing the research and funding, and she's been doing, all of that as a part of her VISTA role. Now, Shelby Lemons is an AmeriCorps VISTA member serving as the National Development Coordinator at Reading Partners in Oakland. Fun fact, Shelby attended one of my PSOs. Hello, so glad you could be back. Prior to becoming a VISTA, Shelby earned a master's in public affairs with a concentration in nonprofit management from Indiana University, where she also worked as the operations associate for the Boys and Girls Clubs of Bloomington. So Shelby, hello again, welcome, so glad you could join us.
Thanks, Calvin. I'm really glad to be here. I'd like to begin with a quick overview of my VISTA site and role to give you all some context surrounding my work. So my VISTA site is Reading Partners, which is a national literacy nonprofit that operates in 14 regions across the United States. It's headquartered in Oakland, California, which is where I've been serving since last August. So I'm getting close to wrapping up my term. In my role as the National Development Coordinator, I lead prospect research for foundations, corporations, and individuals. I also draft and coordinate grant proposals and reports, create collateral, and keep our donor database up to date. I am part of a 7-member national development team. Reading Partners has development teams in each region that raise money for their respective regions, but my team has our own national development fundraising goal, and we seek funding from national funders. We also support multi-region funding opportunities. So now I'm going to move into some corporate research tips. I found that researching corporations can be a bit tricky, so I have some tips to share with you all that I've picked up this year. When researching a corporation, use Google to find out if the corporation has either a corporate-sponsored foundation or a corporate direct giving program. Now, understanding which type of entity it is will be extremely helpful in the research process. Corporations provide support to nonprofits through direct giving programs, private foundations, and/or public charities. This can sometimes be confusing for grant seekers, but here are some of the elements that may help to distinguish between the two types of corporate giving. So first, company-sponsored foundations are separate legal entities which maintain close ties with the parent company, and their giving usually reflects company interests. They can be private foundations or public charities. You can often find more information on these foundations because they must follow the appropriate laws governing private foundations and public charities, including public disclosure requirements. You can find their 990 on Guidestar, and you can often find more information on Foundation Center as well. Corporate direct giving programs can be called corporate social responsibility programs, and they are not separate legal entities like foundations are. They are an arm or a department of a company, and they often include employee matching gifts, in-kind gifts, and volunteer programs as part of their grant-making activities. They are not bound by the same laws as foundations, so it may be hard to find information on these programs and their grant-making. All right, moving on to some more corporate research tips. The next one is obvious, but don't forget to look at the corporation's website to see what information is listed. Another source is to search for annual reports or CSR reports. For CSR reports, some companies that have corporate social responsibility departments or philanthropic departments will usually publish a CSR report, which is an annual report with information on how much they donated that year and to which organization. Annual reports from foundations or nonprofits are also a useful source. They usually have a donor list, and this list may not explicitly detail how much the donation was, but there are often categories that can tell you a general idea. You can also use Foundation Center's company search function to look up company profiles and past grants. This may not be a comprehensive list for corporate giving programs, though, as corporations, again, are not required to disclose their giving. Lastly, you can use Google News to find articles and press releases on philanthropic donations of large foundations and corporations, as well as prominent individuals. And when I search in Google News, I type in the name of the prospect, plus donation, grant, philanthropy, etc., and search. So trying a combination of those search terms is very useful.
Cool. Thank you so much, Shelby. That was really helpful and gave us a different perspective talking about corporate grants. And we just saw how researching funding opportunities using various approaches online and offline. So we learned a little bit about doing that. Of course, you'll take notes along the way, but now that you have all this information and you've done all of this research, how do you organize the information? Sometimes it can be overwhelming. And so I just wanted to give you an opportunity to look at a structured organization tool that I use. And of course, you can use whatever organizational tool works best for you. One of the things that I really like to do in my organization is have shareable documents. So we use Google Drive pretty regularly to do that. And it's a really good way to not only make sense of these grants to you, but to others in your organization, as well as perhaps a VISTA that comes in after you or down the road when your organization might hire somebody to do this work. So at the risk of going all librarian on you, I'm going to share how I do this tracking and how I organize my findings. First thing I do is I'm all about the spreadsheet, because you can organize your spreadsheet many different ways depending on what you need it to do. So I make a spreadsheet that captures the funder's website, any contact names that you found in your research, other contact details, type of funding that you have determined you should request in your research. You've noticed that they do give core support funding and that's something your organization wants, or that they really, really like to do project funding, or they're a place to go to get new computers, they do capital funding, and you want to put that down for anybody else in your organization. You want to put any key notes that you have, and then what I do is you'll notice where it says guidelines and downloads, I have a link to a folder, and we're going to look a little bit closer to how I organize these items in the next slide. That link goes boom. If I click that link, it's going to go to one of these files, the Annenberg Foundation, the really cleverly made up blah, blah foundation, or the SMART Paper Foundation, which is actually another Los Angeles foundation. And then you'll see that my spreadsheet is even there. That's the spreadsheet that we just came from. It's sitting here in this folder right now. Inside each of these folders, you will find that if there are any files that have to come from, that I need or anybody needs from that foundation, this is where I organize the file. So downloads, you'll see attachment templates for the Annenberg Foundation, which we've already visited. And inside of that folder is actually those files that we talked about way back when we were at the Annenberg website. So when I said that they have budget templates and things like that, inside of this file you will see, when we step inside where it says downloads and attachments, you'll see they have their budget template and their diversity questionnaire and their private funding sources template that I have to use to apply for this grant. I'm not allowed to use my own format for this particular funder. Some funders are not this particular about things. Some funders are very particular, and you want to make sure that whoever is going to end up writing the grant has access to this information, and that they can very easily click through your spreadsheet and find everything that they need to be able to successfully write this grant. Finally, we're going to look at sort of our spreadsheet organizational skills. As you get a little deeper into your dive, what I do is I use a color coding. Green means go. Let's go after this funder right now. Maybe they don't have any restrictions on, like Annenberg Foundation, you can always, they what's called rolling submission, so I can always apply. I don't have to wait for a particular grant period, whereas the SMART Paper Foundation, they have a very short window. I can only apply or send my letter of inquiry to them between December and February. It's July right now. I almost said it's August. Apparently, I don't know what the date is. It's July right now, and I'm not going to go after the SMART Paper Foundation until December. So my immediate is going to be Annenberg. I'm going to say, let's go there first. Remember that a spreadsheet is a live document. You can use color coding or reorganize yourself by priority areas like amount of funding, due dates, or funding types. Here, I left the same order, but I used this green, yellow, and then if I had anybody like I really didn't think was a good idea for us to go after, I might put, for a grant, I might make them red. And I'm passionate about good organizational systems, so it's really about being organized that makes your research useful. And I really wanted to illustrate that you are very much, as a researcher, you're very much in control of how the next person receives this information. So whether or not you use my organizational tool, it's a really good idea not to leave anybody out in the wild and to really give them everything they need to successfully apply to a grant. Also, if you're doing a 3-month research period and then you're following it up with a 3-month writing period as your organization, you're going to forget what you downloaded and what you have. So this tool is not just great for others in your organization, it's also a great tool for you, hopefully. All right, moving on, strategizing your approach. More cute pictures of my staff here. This was our 10-year anniversary homecoming dance. We're going to talk about strategizing. I do want you to know that this happens concurrently with research. This is not about one system, you do one thing, then you do another thing, then you do another thing. And so you will always be pausing, going back to your spreadsheet, adding notes, going back to the research phase. It's a constant cycle. And it is also a constant cycle of getting into deep and meaningful conversations about funding and about development with your development director and or executive director to make sure that you're constantly refining how you do this work. So now we're at what we're calling step 3, but really it is an iterative process. You're constantly cycling around and around in this process. And now that you know how to research your organize your research findings, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can actually use this information. So we're going to walk through the process of creating a strategic approach to funders so that you can maximize your chances of actually getting funded. Here we go. What do they fund? Really, really important. You're going to use the findings from your research that you've organized into a spreadsheet, and you'll want to come up with a plan for which funders to approach and how much funding to request from each. look at who they're currently funding. Do you recognize any of those organizations? Is it one of your partners? Like Day One is one of my partners. Do their interests seem to be geographically lumped in a particular area of the county or region? We in Los Angeles have a lot of funders who might say, oh, we fund all of Los Angeles County, but there are 10 million people in Los Angeles County. And when you really, really look at who they might fund really a small pocket of, let's say, South Los Angeles or East Los Angeles. And my geographic region might not even be on their map. And that doesn't mean that I can't go after their funding, but I want to be cognizant of that. On the next slide, we're going to talk about what do they fund. You want to make sure that they show a clear interest in your specific area of need. So their foundation center profile may say health as an interest area, but it's clear that every single project they ever fund is a garden. They love to fund gardens, and you don't have a garden. So you may want to flag this foundation so that your executive director or development director can ask about their board's current priorities on their call with this foundation. Example number 2 is their profile says you want to show a recent history of giving the type of funding that you seek. So the profile says that they give general operating funds, but you can't find the last time they gave a core support or general operating grant. Everything you see is for capital funding. So again, they might technically say that they give general operating grants, and they don't want to take that off their website because they might give them again. But in this particular grant year or this particular foundation cycle, they're really focused on capital campaigns, and they might not be willing to accept your proposal for general operating or to fund your proposal until a year or 2 down the road. So the idea here is that you don't want to waste time on a best fit. You're in control. Don't apply if you can't meet the funder expectations, or at the very least, make sure that there is deeper conversation before you just send off a grant. And finally, we want to look at how much money should we request. One thing to consider that's really important is a percent of project or percent of overall budget. It's a new relationship theoretically, sometimes, or it's a returning relationship with a foundation that you haven't received funding from for a number of years. New organizations usually won't get funded for more than 10% of their overall budget. This is not always the case, and certainly you will have funders that really want to invest heavily in you. But for your first time out to a new foundation, you want to think about being really strategic. So you want to make sure that you're not asking for more than 10% of a total budget. You want to make sure that you're not asking them to fund a full project. Usually they won't fund more than half a project for a first time, or at least that's a conversation to have with them, and be thoughtful about this. You know that they want to know the reason why they do this, the reason why they will only fund a portion, usually, and I'm going to keep saying usually because you never know, all funders are unique, but the reason they won't often do this is because they want to see that if your funding should disappear, you're not available for funding for a number of years, that your program is sustainable, that without their funding, you can still persist. So, of course, there are always exceptions, but this is a good rule of thumb. In figuring out how much to ask for, consider the size of grants they have made to other organizations with similar projects. Don't be easily persuaded by that size of funding. You need to make sure that you know the size of that budget, and you also want to see if they funded that organization for multiple years, because when a funder funds you for multiple years, they will usually increase funding over time. So they're not going to give as much percentage of funding to a new organization that they will with one that they have a long-term relationship with. So you don't want to jump the gun. You don't want to say, wow, this foundation was funded for $100,000, so that's what we're going to ask for. You want to think about budget size, and you want to think about that relationship. And finally, be prepared to make a clear case about how much funding you're asking for. So you want to make sure that you're ready to say, we think that 10% of our overall budget is a sustainable amount of money that down the road we will continue to be able to grow and build our funding sources and get this 10% from other foundations. You want to really be able to say, hey, we're sustainable and we are thoughtful. We're going to move on to a true-false question. It is time for you guys to participate a little bit. It's time for some participation. So in the chat panel, say whether you think this statement is true or false. Never call a foundation before submitting a proposal. please enter your answer in the chat.
Already seeing a lot of falses there.
I feel like I definitely gave this away in my conversation. I totally telegraphed the answer to this. But nonetheless, I'm liking the falses that we're seeing.
Yeah.
And the reason is, but also we want to make sure that we understand that the inverse is also not true. And what I mean by that is that your rule is not always call a foundation, because there are some foundations that really don't want to hear from you. And it says on their website, don't call us. Or it's really telling if they don't have their phone number at all on the website, and it just says, please submit a letter of inquiry. Some foundations don't want to be bothered, or they don't have staff, and they just have a board, and the board members don't want to be bothered. So unless it explicitly says so, or they make themselves very, very unavailable to you, it's best to call, and it's best if leadership makes this first contact, and by that I mean your executive director and or your development director. So your job here is to set them up for success. And we're going to look a little bit more at funder outreach etiquette, but I really wanted to make sure, and it looks like you do, understand that funder etiquette is first and foremost to make that phone call unless they say that you should not. You want to have that conversation. All right, so moving on. Did everybody get to answer? Are we good, Calvin?
I think so. It looks like there's a good amount of consensus there, so I think so.
Cool. All right, well, you guys got a little break. You guys got to click around a little bit, and we all agree. We're going to move on to funder outreach etiquette. And so I'm going to be really kind of honest here. The relationship with most foundations can be pretty paternalistic. And unless they're really, really unique, and I think there are more and more that are opening their doors and learning about the back and forth in non-paternalistic relationships with organizations. But many of them are kind of old school. And they expect that things are done a certain way. They expect a certain protocol. And it's always best that the first call to a new funder, since you might not know what their style is, comes from your organization's top brass. And so that will likely be your executive director, or that will be the development director who can steward this relationship after your service ends. So you want to make sure that you're helping them to cultivate their relationship. So let's dig in a little bit more about how we can set them up for a successful call. And sometimes, if a funder puts literally every single piece of information, and you might have noticed this with the Annenberg Foundation, everything is there, and you get to apply on their website, and there's so much information there, it's really hard to come up with a reason to call, because the last thing you want to do is call a funder and ask for information that's readily available on their website. That looks kind of sloppy, right? It looks like you haven't done your research. And the truth is, as we know, we've gone through all of this, you've done a ton of research. And so you want to introduce yourself to this foundation by being strategic around how and why you reach out. And you want them to remember you as informed and prepared. So look through your research and maybe come up with a few questions that you can pitch to your organizational leadership around the phone call that they're going to make. My go-to question is, because we're applying for our first time, we want to ensure our proposal is in line with the board's current priorities. Like I said before, sometimes the priorities shift over time and they won't all be readily available on the website. There are some funders that are constantly updating these things. The Weingart Foundation in Los Angeles always is putting out, if you're on their email list, they're always putting out, here's what we're currently interested in. But a lot of funders don't do that. And so you want to make sure that this is kind of an easy softball question and they don't mind getting it. If you don't meet their current expectations or your project doesn't fit, it's a good idea probably not to apply. And also, during this conversation with a funder, one thing that your executive director or development director, or you, if you go into development in the future after your VISTA service, might notice is that a funder might say, yeah, I think you're a good fit for a $25,000 grant. And on your spreadsheet, you may have been thinking, we're going to ask them for 50. Don't ask them for 50. Ask them for 25. They have now told you what they're willing, that's what they think you're a good fit for. You've got to go back and change that information on the spreadsheet so that you're up to date with everything. So like when I said before, this is a very iterative project. You're constantly going back to your spreadsheet. You're constantly going back to the research phase. These calls are an opportunity to update that spreadsheet. So following the phone call that your executive director or development director will have, you want to make sure you schedule a sit down with whomever made that phone call so that you can update the spreadsheet. Sometimes they'll have the phone call, they'll write notes down next to them, and they won't be thinking about updating that stuff. So this is another really good opportunity to engage in conversation within your organization. And now we're going to hear from Shelby again. She's going to talk a little bit about the strategy process, how the strategy process works at her organization, Reading Partners, which, by the way, is an organization that I partner with and love dearly, so we're all related to each other. Cool. Come on, Shelby.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
Thank you. So at Reading Partners, our process begins with prospect identification. Usually my directors give me a list of prospects that they've heard about for me to research. And it's really important to ask the source of the prospect why they are suggesting the prospect, and this gives really important context that can frame your research. You always want to start with what your organization knows about the prospect already, and be sure to check your organization's G Drive or donor database. The next step is to research and compile a brief. As you research, keep in mind the 3 C's. Now, this is something that we use a lot at Reading Partners. So the 3 C's are caring, connection, and capacity. These will help frame your research. First is caring. As you research, you want to evaluate the funder's level of caring for your organization's mission. So in my case, does this corporation give to other K-5 literacy nonprofits? Next is connection. As you research, you want to search for an existing relationship the funder has to your organization. Maybe one of your board members knows someone at that corporation. Last is capacity. You'll want to research what size contribution the prospect is capable of giving or the typical grant size a foundation gives. So after I've compiled my research brief, I include a summary and a list of next steps that I present to my directors in our bi-weekly pipeline meetings, where we discuss our prospects and the cultivation and stewardship of our donors. In that meeting, my directors and I decide if we should pursue the prospect and what next steps are. We have a rubric based on the 3 C's where we assign points to each category. A big focus for us, if we are a direct fit, is finding a connection to a foundation or a corporation if they do not accept unsolicited proposals. Then we take our next steps if we have decided to pursue the opportunity, or we review the research each year if we did not pursue the opportunity. And that's really to see if the foundation or the corporation's priorities have changed. So now that you've heard about Reading Partners' prospect research process, I'd love to share an example of a successful opportunity that came out of my research. A few months ago, one of our board members heard that the Balmer Group was expanding their staff and gearing up to do more grant making. So I was charged with creating a research profile to see if we would fit their giving priorities. So for caring, I discovered that Reading Partners does fit within Balmer's giving priorities. And we also had a few connections to the group, which was really great. We had 2 board members who knew individuals who started to work at Balmer. We are also connected to Balmer through one of our biggest funders, EMCF, as the Balmer Group invests in EMCF. So you can often look for connections, those kinds of connections as well. In terms of capacity, past grants showed that Balmer gives 6- to 7-figure gifts for unrestricted funding, which is exactly what Reading Partners is looking for. So after researching the 3 C's, I was confident in our alignment to Balmer's giving priorities. The next step was to present my research to my directors, and our conversation mostly focused around how to find and deepen our connections to Balmer and to discuss next steps. So after inviting a program officer to have a site visit with us, we secured a meeting with key decision makers, and we were invited to submit a proposal. So after a few meetings and a pretty lengthy proposal, we found out that our proposal was successful and we were to be awarded a $1 million grant, which was really awesome.
Yeah, getting $1 million grant is pretty much every grant writer's dream, especially those of us who work in smaller organizations. So thank you so much for sharing this process, Shelby, and for the example of how you found an opportunity that was a really great fit. Also an opportunity that really had to do with those relationships that are built within organizations. And so cannot stress enough how important it is to constantly be in conversation at your organization. And Shelby really showed the importance of that, because $1 million, so such a big deal. There's no point in chasing after opportunities that don't suit your organization's needs. What we just learned is that somewhere there's a great fit, and really it's about research and attention and relationships to find those perfect fits and not waste our time on square peg round hole stuff. So we're going to take just a minute. We've been talking a lot about cash money, and we are going to talk about both some smaller cash resources and also in-kind resources. So everything that we've been talking about is about cash, but in your back pocket, that time of day, in the back of your packet, you have a chart with all of this information and more about some in-kind and smaller cash resources that are available to you. And since there's no one place to send you, oh, like the in-kind, Valhalla, there is no in-kind Valhalla. You just have to start Googling stuff or visiting websites, and then you get an idea. You can also go to other organizations' websites and see who they've worked with for in-kind donations, maybe a tech company like Microsoft or Dell, or maybe they show that they get resources from TechSoup, which gives software and sometimes hardware at low cost or no cost. Pro bono support from somewhere like the Taproot Foundation, or university programs like a graduate student project. And so there are so many things out there, and part of it is just Googling, and our handout will give you a little bit about that. Usually there's a simple online form or a letter. Always respect the terms and conditions of any in-kind gift that you receive. A lot of organizations or foundations or companies will require that you follow certain guidelines. And finally, you also need to consider the IRS rules for assets. And what this means is you can't simply get a bunch of computers and then throw them away in the garbage because you didn't need them, or leave them or give them to your staff to take home and keep forever. You really have to steward these things. And the IRS requires that you transfer assets to another nonprofit organization if they're still in good working order. Obviously, if you have 20-year-old laptops and they're just sitting in a closet somewhere, the statute of limitations has probably run out on this. But if you have good in working order to things that were donated to you, you have to find another organization with a like mission to donate them to. So the bottom line here is don't get stuff that you don't need just because it's free stuff. Good to be conscientious. All right, so you guys probably have some experience with in-kind or cash resources, and so we have a little chat question set up here. Let's answer your ideas. So take a few seconds to share your resources. Where have you found in-kind or cash resources that were fairly easy to get to, or didn't take a ton of time or energy to cultivate? Maybe you got a $25 gift certificate from the local grocery store, you got a $500 cash gift, which is usually the max for a local bank branch. To get anything bigger, you usually have to go through corporate, or some other gift of cash or in-kind resources. So if you're on a mobile device, you will find a chat feature at the bottom of the participant panel. And I'm going to hand this over to Calvin so he can let us know what you're coming up with.
Yeah, I'm seeing some good things in here. Someone says, the Chamber of Commerce. Melanie says lots of restaurants will cater for events if you apply 1 to 3 months in advance. I think that's really good advice if you're trying to have an event and really save money. If you have the forethought to do it, it's definitely worth a shot. I think with a lot of these things, you really just have to be shameless and put yourself out there and say, hey, maybe they'll say no, but that's the worst they can do. I'm seeing Bob Evans restaurant gift cards. Requesting gift cards from grocery stores and other restaurants is really easy. Again, yeah. So Elizabeth, I don't know if you have, if you can put something in the chat, just sort of how you maybe have done that in the past. Like, did you use a form letter? Did you just call them up, write an email? Someone says free venues for events. That's another thing. To say, hey, I'm working with this nonprofit. We're holding this event, but we don't have much money. Can we use your event space? We'll clean it up after, I promise. You know, things like that. Some office supplies. We've got some really great answers in here.
Yeah, you know, one of the interesting things, somebody brings up free venues for event, and since you saw our little picture a couple slides ago of all my staff dressed in our homecoming gear, we had our homecoming dance at the Boys and Girls Club in a Boys and Girls Club gym, and our local Boys and Girls Club, who is a partner of ours, we have a relationship with them, so they were willing to donate that space, and it was exactly what Calvin just said. Clean up, take good care of it, and we were able to host a dance with 200 guests in a gym, and it was a homecoming dance. We were able to decorate it as we wanted, so it was the perfect space for the event we wanted to have, and it also was no cost, so that was cash in hand we were able to keep when people donated.
Totally,
and
I think someone made a really good point, you know, that they asked for desserts from a place and they kind of considered it free advertising. I mean, I think that's something really to harp on too, if you're getting something from someone or asking for products from someone, to say, hey, you know, pass me some T-shirts, give me some bags with your logo on it, you know, give me some cupcakes with your place on it, you know, and we'll kind of chat you up, and you're also helping us out, you know, on that.
Yeah, and in fact, Kelvin, one of the things, I'm sure some of the people on this call might already have taken or be in the resource development course, and one of the things we talk about is sponsorship, giving people the opportunity to invest in the organization in a way that gives them some sort of return on that investment in the form of marketing or other things. So you guys are coming up with great ideas, and we're also thinking through how do we cultivate relationships with, I saw some people say Chick-fil-A or other places that give food with our grocery stores. There's some great things there, and sometimes you want to look for ways that when you go out and talk to them, hey, here's what we can do for you.
Right. If it's
within IRS guidelines. Sorry, go ahead, Kelvin.
Oh, I was just say, if it's mutually beneficial, it's going to go a long way. You know, if you're able to make that case, say, hey, you're helping me, but we're also helping you. Let's figure out how to do this together. I think that about covers it. We have some really, really great suggestions in here. One last one says Whole Foods has an easy application for 5% Giving Day. We made about $5,000 during it. That's amazing.
That's a huge amount. Wow, that's really great on a 5% Giving Day. Also, Whole Foods will give, so will Trader Joe's. We'll get food. It gets Trader Joe's. I think you can do like a $30 little shopping spree, or however much money they give. You just have to. Somebody earlier brought up, and Kelvin said, you have to ask in advance. And another thing is thinking about asking for these things early in the month. A lot of these local grocery stores and places like that will have monthly allotments. So if you go on July 25th, they probably are out of their July giving, and you'd have to wait until August. So just something to think about.
Yeah, totally. That makes a lot of sense. Do you want to take us on to next steps?
Shelby and I gave you a lot of information here today, so in an effort to help you refocus back to some really operationable next steps. Here's a short list of a few things you can do right now. You can do these this week. So find out if you have access to the Foundation Center, and you might remember you go back to the Foundation Center page, you go to Ask Us, and there's that map that says Find Us. You click on that, and you can just put in your area and go from there to find out whether or not there's somewhere free in your area. You can identify current and recent funders of your organization through doing research internally or through talking to key people in your organization. Identify what you need to fund. What are the couple of key projects or focus? Are you just looking for core support or unrestricted or general support? Are you looking for capital funds? Do you need technology or computers or a van or a building? Are you looking for program or project support? Think that through. Set up a spreadsheet or file system to gather your research, like we looked at. talk to your executive director and or development director about how they see your role in fund development and how you will be communicating as you move through the research process. If you're really, really going hard at now is our grant writing, now is our grant strategic time, you might want to set up a weekly conversation about how things are moving along, or it might be something that happens over time. So you need to have that conversation so you can see where you are in the process. Now, the next slide, if you scroll through your PDF, is resources that we have available for you. Writing is really the next step, but this webinar, we're not going to really talk about writing because we have so many resources available for you in other forms. One is Writing Winning Proposals, and that is available as an on-demand webinar on the VISTA campus. It walks you through the process of developing a letter of inquiry, or also known as an LOI. Sure, a lot of you already know that, but just in case you don't, and a funding proposal detailing each section of a standard grant application. This is a really, really helpful webinar for this next step. And for those of you who have not written any grants before or are a little bit earlier in learning, great tool for you. Also, 3 times a year, we offer VISTA's a 10-week course on various aspects of fundraising and grant writing. This course is free to VISTA, and you can also receive credit for this course. It's a pass-fail course. We spend one whole module on grants, and we end that module with a written letter of inquiry. So this actually gives you an opportunity to really activate those things you might learn in the Writing Winning Proposals webinar, as well as the VISTA course. So also then spend some time on the Foundation Center, on Guidestar, on other organizations' websites. Get to know the tools that will help you through the various steps of the grant writing. But you can also find it on the vistacampus.gov website, which you all have access to, under resources. You can also apply to those VISTA online courses at vistacampus.gov as well under online courses. So you probably have been to the VISTA Campus site and can probably navigate that pretty easily.
So we're about to get to our Q&A portion where you all have the opportunity to ask questions. But before we do, we're going to open our evaluation poll. That'll be open throughout the end of this presentation. If you've been on our webinars before, you know the drill. But if this is your first time, we really want to know what you thought. So on the right side of your screen, you'll find a quick poll where you can share feedback about this webinar. Just give it a moment to load. I know it'll come up eventually. Give us a second. But we really like to improve these webinars and really want to know what you think and know what you want to kind of learn about in the future. Let us know what you want to hear about. So please take the time to fill out that evaluation. It means a lot to us because we really read every single one of your responses and take them very seriously. So that being said, wait for that poll to pop up. We're going to go to some Q&A. We have just a couple of questions in the Q&A, but I want to ask our operator to let people know how to ask questions over the phone.
Thank you. For questions over the phone, press *1. Please unmute your line and record your name only to be introduced. Again, for questions or comments from the phone, press *1. If you'd like to withdraw the request at any time, you may press *2. Thank you. One moment, please, while the questions register.
All right. Thank you. And we'll check back in on the phone in just a second. So I had one question queued up that we kind of touched on, but I think, Mother, that I think you can help us dive a little deeper into this one. So Amy Bustamante asks, are all grant search programs charging for membership? I need to search for relevant grants, but most websites charge a membership fee. And I know we touched on that a little bit, but would you say, that most of them charge some sort of membership fee?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I would say that most of them do, but there's always a workaround. And the reality is that more and more foundations, especially the bigger ones, and honestly, in your area, you should know the big foundations, right? It takes a long time to cultivate relationships with your family foundations, with your really local foundations. Those are the guys who aren't going to have a website. But the big ones in Los Angeles, we looked at the Annenberg Foundation. I mentioned the S. Mark Taper Foundation. I mentioned the Weingart Foundation. These might be totally foreign names to you. But in Los Angeles, they are everybody's #1 go-to. And And sometimes to really get attention from those smaller foundations, you need to have investment from the big guys. And so those guys all have websites. And the easiest way to find out where they are if you don't have Foundation Center access is, again, to go to those websites of your community partners. Their websites are completely free. And also to go to Guidestar to search by region, to search by geographic region. It's a little bit clunkier as a search tool than Foundation Center is, but again, it's a really good opportunity for your organization to update your Guidestar report and get that free access. And it's also a really, really good opportunity to get to know that really great and really, really effective tool. It's just not as search user-friendly as the Foundation Center is. The last thing I will say is sometimes, not with Foundation Center, but certainly with GrantWatch and tools like that, you can get enough information to just Google beyond that. And so there are easy hacks. It takes a little bit of time and energy, and I don't know if Shelby has anything to add to that because she's really like doing this work right now. But you can find a way around if you don't have Foundation Center access. It's just not a one-stop shop. It's a little bit more complicated, that's all. Shelby, I don't know, do you have any advice there?
Yeah, I have been very fortunate to always have access to Foundation Center either through the public library or through my organization, but I do agree with you, Mo, that there are a lot of other just resources just by using Google that you can find if you don't have access to Foundation Center.
Cool. Kelvin, any other good ones there?
Yeah, thank you. Natalie says, what are 990 forms? Natalie, what is a 990?
Great question, Natalie. A 990 is the IRS tax form that organizations must file every year. It used to be the case that organizations with under $25,000 a year in revenue didn't have to file anything. That is no longer the case. Now all organizations, regardless of size, have to file either a short form, it's actually called a postcard, a 990 postcard, or the longer form. And it's just like you file your 1040s every year, right? You file your tax forms for the government. This is exactly the same thing, but organizations have to do it. And they collect a lot of information. And one thing that you can learn on a Foundation's 990 is at the end of a large foundation, especially, you know, they're given a lot of money, at the end of their 990 form, they will list every single grant that they gave. It's in the area of the 990 called the schedules. So there's Schedule A, Schedule B, Schedule C, and that's after sort of the main pages of the form where you put your address and you put your revenue and all of those things. The schedules have deeper dive information on them. So if you scroll through a Foundation's 990, and they can be pretty hefty, right? They can be 100 pages sometimes. You scroll through, you can see all of the grants that they gave over the course of a year. And that's a really, really good place to go if they don't have that listed on their website. 990s are super useful, and that's why I wanted to point that out. So, Natalie, I'm so glad you asked for anybody who doesn't know what that is. And one thing I would really encourage you all to do is try to go to Guidestar, find out from your organization leadership whether you already have a Guidestar login. If you do not, or you do not have an up-to-date Guidestar profile, I would absolutely encourage you to have a conversation with them about why you should update that and include your organization's information on a Guidestar profile. And from there, just start searching around and downloading 990s. Another thing that you can do is just very simply ask somebody at your organization to see the organization's 990. Your organization, especially if you are a nonprofit organization, you file 990, and you can just take a look at it and look through it, look at those schedules, see what's in there, and you get to get a sense of what that form includes. It's pretty comprehensive.
Thanks. That was an excellent answer. So I'm seeing about one more question in the Q&A. Again, guys, if you have any questions, place them in the Q&A. I'm going to check on the phone. And see if we have anyone, and then we'll come back and answer our last question if no more exist. So do we have any on the phone, operator?
On the phone, we're showing no questions. As a reminder, it's *1.
All right, thank you. So our last question that we have here is from Brenda. She says, when searching for grants in the Foundation Center, I found that under support strategies, they sometimes list just general support. What does that mean?
So general support, and we talked a little bit about this today, and like I said, way back in the beginning of our webinar here, is that organizations and foundations use different terms to mean the exact same thing. So you will see the term general support, you will see general operating support, you will see core support, you will see unrestricted support. And typically what that means is that they are trusting the organization, usually, to use the funding in whatever way they see fit. And that usually means that you can use the funding sometimes even for fundraising activities, which often foundations will fund, so to fund your development team. Sometimes you can use some of it for programs, but some of it for literal general operating, for administrative support, for your accountant, people like that in your organization. That's what core support or general operating support usually means. But it is really important that whoever calls the foundation really is clear about what they hope to use those funds for, because I have definitely gone to foundations that have their own special definition of these terms, and they'll say, yes, of course, we'll fund anything except fundraising activities. Or I had one say, yes, it's general support, but what they really meant was general program support, because they weren't actually interested in funding any administrative resources. So to me, I would call that program support, because that goes directly to direct service for my students and not to accounting or administrative, but they didn't have that same definition. So sometimes it's really important to ask, but typically general support means that they can be used, those funds can be used in pretty much any way in the organization. Very open, and I'm going to just come right out and say forward-thinking foundations will let you use general support funds even to put away for future rainy day funds. So they'll even allow you to put money away and not spend it all in one year. And that is certainly a question you want to ask. Do we have to spend all these funds this year, or can we put anything away? So that's the long answer. I don't know if that really addressed your question, but there's a lot of ways to answer that.
Yeah, I think that was great. I think it did. And then we have one last question from Natasha, I think is how it's pronounced. Sorry if I messed that up. I'm not sure I fully get the question. Maybe you will know. The question is, what if you just submit an e-postcard of the 990? And I don't know if there's more context to that.
So I'm assuming that what you're saying, Natasha, is that your organization is too small or small enough that they don't have to submit a full 990. Is that correct? I don't know if we have any way to answer that there.
Yeah, I don't know either.
But if that is the case, I'm going to go on and muddle through on this one. If your organization only does, if you have under $25,000 in gross receipts, so you only submit a e-postcard, that's okay. That's completely legal. You'll want to go online to Guidestar and look at other 990s so you can see what a full 990 looks like. You might not be able to see it through your organization, but you can see it through a foundation or a partner organization or somebody else. Also, by the way, it is completely in the right for anybody to call your organization and ask to see a copy of your 990, and you're legally bound to share that document with them, whether it's an e-postcard or whether it's a full 990, and they are legally bound to do the same for you. So if you cannot find a 990 online, you can always call and request one they've sent to you. But if you do submit an e-postcard, the hard part here is if you go out looking for foundation funding, a lot of foundations really want to see that full 990 because they want to see that high level of accountability where you're really showing the detailed information about the accounting practices of your organization. A 990 will ask whether you have a major gifts policy. The 990 asks whether you have a conflict policy. So it's a little bit deeper and it tells a little bit more about your organization. And some foundations do want to see that. So even if you have under $25,000 in gross receipts, sometimes it is still better for an organization to submit a full 990 than just the e-postcard. And in fact, I'm on a board of an organization that's very, very small, and I just had this conversation with them about how they need to shift to submitting a 990 instead of an e-postcard. So just something to think about. You might not be the person to make that decision, but as you move out into your potentially a nonprofit career, it's something to think about. We know a lot of people want to start nonprofits and things like that, and that's something to keep in mind.
All right, great. Excellent. Again, excellent answer. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Calvin.
Yeah. So it looks like we are just about done. I'll share one last comment from Carissa, who says, more of a comment than a question, but you gain access to some resources by completing the resource development course for a certain amount of time.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, and that's a benefit. That's a really good benefit.
Yeah,
all right.
You do get a month, if you do take the resource development course, you can access the Foundation Center for a month. So it's a really good way to do some really quick research, organize it all, and you know, I did research when my organization first started a little over 10 years ago. I went on Foundation Center one time, spent like a whole day downloading things, and that kept me busy for years. Literally years.
Take that month and turn it into years if you get up.
You really can. If you move fast, you can get a lot of information in a short period of time.
Yes. All right. Well, I want to thank our presenters, Mo and Shelby. Thank you both so much for being here. I want to thank our production assistant from Education Northwest, and I want to thank you for attending this webinar. And we hope that you can join us in September for our next webinars. One is titled Preventing Gender Fender Benders, which is a fun one that I'm putting on, so you'll hear my voice on that, and Planning the Perfect Meeting on 9/21. Now, we don't have any webinars in August, but we'll pick back up again in September, and we would love for you to join us. So thank you again to everyone, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, everybody. This was wonderful.